An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kappas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning.
Good morning.
Um,
Morning.
today's talk is kind of long. It'll probably be broken up in a couple of sessions. And this is taken from Dongzar Kyetse's Rinpoche's book called What Makes You Not a Buddhist? I like the title. Um, and it's on the four seals. And I guess you could say that a seal is a principle. And this is talked about in the Pali Canon. So this would be not a Mahayana teaching, but a core teaching of Buddhism, or at least of the Buddha. And the seals were, the teaching on the seals were, of course, came after, but you'll see how it relates to the Four Noble Truths. So I'll begin. Buddhism, says Dongzar Kyentse Rinpoche, is distinguished by four characteristics or seals. If all these four seals were found in a path or philosophy, it can be considered the path of the Buddha. People often ask me, what is Buddhism in a nutshell? Or they ask, what particular view or philosophy is Buddhism? And unfortunately, in the West, it seems to have landed in like the religious department, or even self-help, or self-improvement. And it's clearly in the trendy meditation department. And I would like to challenge the popular definition of Buddhist meditation. Many people think meditation has something to do with relaxation, with watching the sunset, or watching the waves on a beach. Charming phrases like letting go or be carefree come to mind. I often think when you Google Zen, you come up with all sorts of things that people are selling, whether it's candles or simplistic furniture or sheets. And it's funny how the ideas of how the Western mind creates in the idea of what things are. From a Buddhist point of view, meditation is slightly more than that. First, I think we need to talk about the real context of Buddhist meditation. This is referred to as the view, meditation, and action. Taken together, these constitute quite a skillful way of understanding the path. Even though we may not use such expressions in everyday life, if we think about it, we always act according to a certain view, meditation, and action. For instance, if we go and buy a car, we choose the one we think is best, most reliable, so on. So the view in this case is the idea or belief that we have. That is, that the car is a good one. Then the meditation is contemplating and getting used to the idea. And the action is actually buying the car, driving it, and using it. This process is not necessarily something Buddhist. It's something we're doing all the time. You don't have to call it view, meditation, action. You can think of it as an idea, getting used to, and obtaining. If these four seals are found in a path or a philosophy, it doesn't matter whether you call it Buddhist or not. You can call it whatever you like. The words Buddhist and Buddhism are not important. I often think of, I don't always think of myself as Buddhist, other than if someone asks. It's not something, a badge that I wear. It's not necessarily something I do. I try to embody the ideas and the principles of this, much like kind of letting go of identities, and it helps me be more open. Because I think labels tend to, at least in my experience, labels tend to close oneself off to other things. And we become kind of nationalistic in our ideas. So what is the particular view that Buddhists are trying to get used to? Buddhism is distinguished by four characteristics or seals. Actually, all these seals are found in a path or philosophy. It doesn't matter whether you call it Buddhist or not. You can call it whatever you like. The words Buddhist and Buddhism are not important. The point is that this path contains the four seals, and it can be considered the path of the Buddha. Therefore, these characteristics are called the four seals of Dharma. And they are: all compounded things are impermanent. And when you think about compound, it's really talking about anything that's, it doesn't have, things don't have a separate self, and they don't exist by themselves. So all things are impermanent. All emotions are painful. This is something that only Buddhists would talk about. Many religions worship things like love with celebration and songs. Buddhists think all suffering. The third is all phenomena are empty. Here we come with the idea of emptiness. They are without inherent existence. This is actually the ultimate view of Buddhism. The other three are grounded on the third seal. Now, sometimes you will hear from different places or information that they talk about the three seals, and they don't talk about a fourth seal. And I always look at it as kind of it's like cutting a pie. No matter how you cut it, it's pie. And so the fourth seal, when you talk about it, is that nirvana is beyond extremes. And without these four seals, the Buddhist path would become theistic, religious Dharma, and its whole purpose would be lost. On the other hand, you could have a surfer giving you teachings on how to sit on the beach watching a sunset. If what he says contains all these four seals, it would be Buddhism. The Tibetans, the Chinese, and Japanese might not like it, but teaching doesn't have to be in a traditional form. The four seals are quite interrelated, as you will see. And then now we come to the first seal. And it is all compounded things are impermanent. Every phenomena that we can think of is compounded, and therefore subject to impermanence. Certain aspects of impermanence, like the changing of the weather, we can accept easily. But there are equally obvious things that we don't accept. For instance, our body is visibly impermanent and getting older every day. And yet, this is something that we don't want to accept. I often look in the mirror, in the morning while washing my face, combing my hair, and thinking that was certainly a different person than I remember. and and I think, well, wow, who's that guy? And it's this like it's sobering sometimes when I think about it, because sometimes I think of myself, especially if I'm relating to something, I think about it as I was then and not as I am now. And then you often, you have this thing of where I wish I knew then what I know now, and then it becomes more of acceptance of who I am today. Certain popular magazines that cater to youth and beauty exploit this attitude. In terms of view, action, and meditation, readers might have a view thinking in terms of not aging or escaping the aging process somehow. They contemplate this view of permanence, and their consequent action is to go to the fitness centers or undergo plastic surgery or all sorts of other hassles. When you think about, there's a whole industry. Oh, there's more. There's many industries on this permanent view of being young forever. Enlightened beings would think this is ridiculous and based on the wrong view. Regardless of these different aspects of impermanence, getting old and dying, the changing of the weather, etc., Buddhists have a single statement, namely this first seal. Phenomena are impermanent because they are compounded. Anything that is assembled will, sooner or later, come apart. When we say compounded, this includes the dimensions of space and time. Time is compounded and therefore impermanent. Without past and future, there is no such thing as the present. I thought this was pretty important, because we often think that, the past is past, the future hasn't happened yet, and there's only now. But without those two things, the third would not exist. So in that sense, it's you see the compound that, and that in that the idea of impermanence. If the present moment was permanent, there would be no future. Since the present is always there, every act you do, let's say plant a flower, sing a song, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. If in singing the song the beginning, middle, or end were missing, there would be no such thing as singing the song, would there? That means that singing a song is something compounded. And thus you go into the idea of the Four Noble Truths, in that clinging to something, and in that loss, when the song ends, instead of enjoying as it is, if we cling to it and go, oh, I wish it went on forever, or played over and over again, then that's where the suffering comes from. So what, we ask? Why should we bother with that? What's the big deal? It has a beginning, a middle, and end. So what? It's not that Buddhists are really worried about beginnings, middles, or ends. That's not the problem. The problem is there is composition and impermanence, as there is with temporal and material things. There is uncertainty and pain. But impermanence isn't really bad news. It depends on how you understand it. In the last couple of weeks, Bruce was reading from Opening the Hand of Thought, and so Uchiyama has an idea about the lessons of impermanence, and that impermanence comes from clarifying what life and death really are. His ideas of that's where what it's answers that question about life and death, is that it's impermanent, and that in that death is not the end, nor is life the beginning. Some people think that Buddhists are pessimistic, always talking about death, impermanence, and aging. But that's not necessarily true. Impermanence is a relief. I don't have a BMW today, and it is thanks to impermanence that the fact that I might have one tomorrow. Without impermanence, I am stuck with the non-possession of a BMW, and can never have one. I might feel severely depressed today, and thanks to impermanence, I might feel great tomorrow, because I might have my BMW. Impermanence is not necessarily bad news. It depends on the way you understand it. Even today, your BMW gets scratched by a vandal, or your best friend lets you down. If you have a view of impermanence, you won't be so worried. I learned the other day that the refrigerant in my air conditioner was impermanent. And my air conditioner was blowing warm air. And at first I was going, oh, it's going to be hot. And there was some suffering. But then I have a friend who's a air conditioning guy, and he assured me that he would look at it. And thus, the impermanence of the refrigerant, which may have caused some suffering, was in itself impermanent, in that he fixed it. So there was a sense of letting go of, oh, it's going to be hot, how are we going to make it through the weekend, blah, 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 and and enjoying it at the moment when it comes back on. But it's not that the end of the world kind of thing. Often I think about the Genjo Koan, because in Dogen's Genjo Koan, he talks about firewood, and when you burn wood, it becomes ash. And then he's talking about the cycle of impermanence. It's much like a tree. When you think about a tree, when it dies and it falls, it's sort of representing death. But in that falling of the tree, it fertiles the ground for the next tree to come. So in a way, it's a composition of, because of the old tree, the new tree can come. So it's the idea of how life springs forth, and death is not a permanent situation, because out of death you see this life. So delusion arises when we don't acknowledge that all compounded things are impermanent. But when we realize this truth deep down, and not just intellectually, that's what we call liberation. Released from this one-pointed, narrow-minded view of permanence. Everything, whether you like it or not, even the path, the precious Buddhist path, is compounded. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And when you understand that all compounded things are impermanent, you are prepared to accept the experience of loss. Since everything is impermanent, this is to be accepted. So that even though the past or history might seem dead, for me, it becomes, if I learn from it, it becomes a seed for my own life on how I might respond by the experience learned from the past. So that brings us to the second seal. All emotions are painful. And I thought about this for a while because he talks about it later, but if you don't particularly like the idea, and I always look at everything that you don't have to be locked into what somebody says or labels. Like I said, if you don't necessarily like the idea of, oh, well, all emotions, well, and then you create this argument in your head, what about this, what about that? So if you want to change it, you could say all dualistic things are painful. The Tibetan word for emotion in this context is zagche, which means contaminated or stained, in the sense of being permeated by confusion or duality. Certain emotions, such as aggression or jealousy, we naturally regard as pain. But what about love and affection, kindness, devotion? Those nice, light, lovely emotions. We don't think of them as painful. Nevertheless, they imply duality. And this means that, in the end, they are a source of pain. And it's because of that impermanence. Once again, if we're clinging to something. But certain emotions, such as aggression or jealousy, we naturally regard as pain. The dualistic mind includes almost every thought we have. Why is this painful? Because it is mistaken. Every dualistic mind is a mistaken mind, a mind that doesn't understand the nature of things. So how are we to understand duality? It is subject and object. Ourselves on one hand and our experience on the other. This kind of dualistic perception is mistaken, as we can see in the case of different persons perceiving the same object in different ways. A man might think a certain woman is beautiful, and that is his truth. But if there is some kind of absolute, independent kind of truth, then everyone else would have to see her as beautiful as well. Clearly, this is not a truth that is independent of everything else. It is dependent on your own mind. It is your own projection. A dualistic mind creates a lot of expectations, lots of hope, lots of fear. Whenever there is a dualistic mind, there is hope and fear. Hope is perfect, systematic pain. We tend to think that hope is not painful, but actually it's a big pain. As for the pain of fear, that's not something we need to explain. The Buddha said, understand suffering. That is the first noble truth. Many of us mistake pain for pleasure. The pleasure that we have now is actually the very cause of pain that we are going to get sooner or later. Another Buddhist way of explaining this is to say that when a big pain becomes smaller, we call it pleasure. That is what we call happiness. And this is what I think he speaks of it. But there's all these industries, and that's why he talked about what not makes you a Buddhist. There's all these industries about happiness and mindfulness, and they've created kind of an industry out of it. And what somehow those are things that we expect to happen. And when they don't, that's where the suffering comes from. Moreover, emotion does not have some kind of inherently real existence. When thirsty people see a mirage of water, they have a feeling of relief. Great, there's some water. But as they get closer, the mirage disappears. What is an important aspect of emotion? Emotion is something that does not have an independent existence. Many of us mistake pain for pleasure. The pleasure we now have is actually the very cause of the pain that we're going to get sooner or later. Another Buddhist way of explaining this is to say that when big pain becomes smaller, we call it pleasure. That's what we call happiness. This is why Buddhists conclude that all emotions are painful. It is because they are impermanent and dualistic, that they are uncertain and always accompanied by hopes and fears. But ultimately, we don't have and never have had an inherently existent nature. So, in a way, they are not worth much. Everything we create through our emotions is, in the end, completely futile and painful. This is why Buddhists do certain meditations. This helps loosen the grip that our emotions have on us and the obsessions we have because of them. And it might seem, it might be what he's talking about seems a little pessimistic, and it's easy to fall into that trap that, well, if all our emotions are painful, then somehow I'm supposed to ignore them. But I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's ultimately saying that they're going to be impermanent, and it's acceptance of that. You can enjoy them, whatever they might be. I remember when I was trapped in this idea of codependence in my relationships, and when I learned to embrace the teachings, that I was able to release that codependence and start feeling the idea of feeling my feelings, because in codependence, much like alcoholism or drug abuse or whatever, that gambling, you start it becomes your coping mechanism, and you start avoiding your emotions by using your coping mechanism. If I focus on somebody else, I don't have to focus on what's going on with me. So when I was able to let go of that codependence, I started feeling my feelings again, and even the ones that you would think are kind of negative, it was a kind of a warm feeling that I could actually feel them, that they were there, that I could feel my suffering, that I could feel the ideas of anger and fear and disappointment. I could actually feel them and process them. And it was very beneficial to me to start feeling those and accepting them that as they are. They come along with everything else. All the good stuff also comes along with the bad stuff. And so there was acceptance there. It doesn't mean that I have to like them. I certainly, it's not something I embrace, but I accept that they come. He has a question. He said, is compassion an emotion? And it said, people like us have dualistic compassion, whereas the Buddha's compassion does not involve subject and object. From the Buddha's point of view, compassion could never involve object and subject. This is called Mahakaruna, great compassion. And so in that, it's a more of a universal compassion, not attached to anything. I'm having difficulty accepting that all emotions are pain. And he says, okay, if you want a more philosophical expression, you can drop the word emotion and simply say all that is dualistic is pain. But I like using the word emotion because it provokes us. And that's an interesting view because, because when I first time I read it, I go, huh, and it made me think, and then then I realized I was picking and choosing because I didn't really appreciate his use of the word emotion. And then as he said, it does provoke you, and I think those are always good things. If you're getting a reactions for something, that's telling you something about yourself. And then he says, the question isn't pain impermanent? He says, yes. If you know this, then you're all right. It's because we don't have this that we go through a lot of hassles trying to solve our problems. And that is the second biggest problem we have, trying to solve our problems. And I think that's the key to that is that um, it's that whole this too shall pass, and that we can rely on if things are not going right, just wait a little bit, it's going to change. It might get worse, it might get better. That's the other part of that is letting go of the idea that of how we want it to change because it is going to change. And certainly there are things through our own karma that can affect how things change. So that's the other part of not only embracing our emotions as they are, not pushing them away, but also embracing the idea that even though things are impermanent, they're going to change, but not necessarily how we think they should. And that's the big don't should on yourself. So I think I will stop there. That's the first two seals, and next week I'll go over the other two. And I thought that was an interesting subject that I don't remember um, us talking about. And I hope it was helpful. And if anybody has any comments or questions, I love it. Thank you very much. Yes, Gary.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was immensely helpful to me. But I had a question. When I first heard all the second seal, I heard all motions are painful,
Oh,
but you were saying all emotions, right?
emotions. Yes.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, great talk. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Karen, could I mention something?
Yes. Go ahead, Gene.
Uh, the first seal brought to mind, maybe others have seen it or heard it, Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement speech in 2005. Do you recall that?
I don't recall the speech, but I know what you're talking about. Yes, I know I've seen it.
The line, the takeaway line was, the greatest invention of life is death. Of course, he's facing cancer and then coming back to Apple, so a lot of changes in his life, but yep.
Yes, the great matter of life and death. It should serve to um, motivate us to do the work, to do the practice that we need to do. I often think I'm kind of halfway between in age between when my dad passed and when my mom passed. And I look at it as the gift, the great gift of life, instead of the dread of the long dark tunnel. I always look at this as a great gift, and that I shouldn't waste it. So yes,
Yeah, he was saying if he didn't have death, well, death was sort of like recycling, I guess. He was telling the graduates, like a lot of commencement speeches, go out there and do something, grab it, and don't, well, like you said, don't dwell on things. And that if there weren't death, there wouldn't be any recycling of life, and wouldn't have new things like the graduates going out there and inventing things that he hadn't even thought of.
Exactly. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Kevin, thank you for the Dharma talk. I really appreciate the talk on the seals. One word that was used by the author quite a bit was compounding, and I'm trying to kind of get a handle on it. What do you think he meant by compounding?
To me, he's talking about codependent arising in that one thing does not there's nothing that exists by itself. There's he's talking about the compounding of everything else. All the influences on that, much like a chair, doesn't exist without the wood and the things that are holding the chair, and without the carpenter who made it, and also by the person who uses it, because as Bruce has talked about, a cup being a cup, but it can be also be a vase. It can be many different things on how it's used and and who made it. It's much like I think what the Heart Sutra talks about, um, in that the ideas of form and emptiness, in that um, nothing exists by itself.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Darrell.
Kevin, I just want to say thank you for the great Dharma talk, and I like what you said at the beginning where you was talking about the Buddhist titles, and I do agree. I feel like it's more better to not say you're a Buddhist, but just to say that I practice it, because it just opens up kind of like a tribal thing where I'm this, you're that, and just it'd be like it's not what we are, but it's what we practice that makes things different.
Yeah.
But we're one human family.
Yes. I've learned, and this is something that in my practice, something I've learned is that I watch myself and how I cling to things, and how I, especially labels, this person is that. I used to be a fireman, and I used to be this. I do this. I think on my Facebook page, I have, husband, dad, grandpa. All these titles, and kind of, and as we were talking with Brian, it's really a compound. I'm created of all the compounded things that are in my life, and that's who I am. If you really want to talk about that, that's really who I am. Is that it's not just one thing. It's not just locked into this idea. And when I say I'm Buddhist, but I talk to a Taoist or I talk to a Presbyterian, I'm not thinking, oh well, that's not right. Yeah, no, that what you're saying, that I become more open on what they're saying and relate it to, it's um uh so I'm letting go of those labels. But yeah, that's thank you for mentioning that.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Okay, thank you for everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, and Bruce will be gone the next 2 weeks, I believe, is what he's told me, unless something changes, as we've learned, impermanence. So I'll be back here next week, and I hope everybody has a great cool week. May your air conditioning be blessed.
Thank you very much.
You bet. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Sangha. I take refuge in Sangha. Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dhamman Saranam Gacchami. Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Dudiyampe Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dudiyampe Dhamman Saranam Gacchami. Dudiyampe Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampe Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampe Dhamman Saranam Gacchami. Tatiyampe Sangham Saranam Gacchami. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week. Bye-bye.